Can you help me?
With what?
I don't understand my homework.
You're asking me? I don't understand my own homework. I can't help you.
Do you think we're stupid?
Sheldon's in college right now and we can't figure out your homework. What do you think?
Georgie Cooper was always remembered as the least likely Cooper sibling to succeed, while Sheldon was celebrated as a once-in-a-generation genius. Georgie was often seen as the older brother who struggled in school, cheated on tests, dropped out before graduating, lied about his age to an older woman, and even got arrested after helping Meemaw transport undeclared cigarettes across the state line. Looking only at those moments, it's easy to conclude that Georgie simply wasn't very smart, but young Sheldon quietly tells a very different story. Beneath the poor grades and bad decisions is someone whose intelligence simply looked different. He could repair engines, negotiate deals before he was old enough to vote, understand people in ways Sheldon never could, and eventually become the person holding the Cooper family together after George Sr.'s death. His story isn't about proving he was smarter than Sheldon. It's about showing that intelligence comes in more than one form. From the beginning, Georgie grows up in a family where only one type of intelligence receives attention. Before he even has the chance to discover who he is, Sheldon has already established himself as the extraordinary child. When Sheldon skips several grades and joins Georgie at Medford High School, Georgie instantly becomes known as the teenager whose little brother is academically outperforming him. The very first episode shows how difficult that is for him. 14-year-old Georgie is embarrassed that his 9-year-old brother is entering the same school, and George Sr. notices his son's frustration before giving him a quiet pep talk. It isn't simply about sharing a school with Sheldon. Georgie already knows what everyone else will be talking about, and it won't be him. That pattern continues throughout the season. Georgie scores a touchdown for the football team, yet much of the attention shifts to Sheldon's mathematical strategy that helped improve the team's performance. Georgie does the work on the field, but Sheldon receives the praise because his contribution fits the family's definition of intelligence.
You think you're going?
I quit. I don't want to play anymore.
Since when?
Since right.
All right, what is going on?
What do you think's going on?
You mean Sheldon?
School only reinforces that feeling. When Georgie struggles through a math test, he secretly writes answers on his shoe, while Sheldon tries to tutor him. At first, the scene seems to highlight how different the brothers are academically. Sheldon effortlessly explains equations, while Georgie can barely follow along. Then the conversation changes. As Sheldon focuses on solving mathematical problems, Georgie begins teaching Sheldon something he completely lacks: how to tell a believable lie. He explains how people think, what makes a story convincing, and why understanding emotions is just as important as understanding facts. The show presents the exchange as comedy, but it quietly reveals that the brothers are intelligent in completely different ways. Sheldon understands numbers. Georgie understands people. That difference appears again during one of the family's uncomfortable dinners. Mary is upset, the house falls silent, and nobody knows how to break the tension. Missy notices the awkwardness. Meemaw changes the subject, and Georgie immediately joins the conversation to keep it going naturally. Nobody asks him to do it, and nobody thanks him afterward. In fact, no one even seems to notice. That becomes one of the defining parts of Georgie's childhood. The qualities he possesses, reading a room, understanding emotions, and keeping people connected, rarely receive recognition because they can't be measured by report cards or IQ tests. Even outside young Sheldon, that attitude continues. In The Big Bang Theory, Mary dismissively refers to Georgie and Missy as being dumb as soup, showing just how deeply the family measured intelligence through academics alone. As the series continues, Georgie repeatedly finds himself excluded from conversations about intelligence. When Sheldon and Missy participate in a university study involving twins, Georgie isn't even part of the discussion. Once again, attention centers on measuring intelligence, while the oldest Cooper sibling quietly stands outside the conversation. Years of being compared to Sheldon could easily have destroyed his confidence, but instead, they push him toward discovering a completely different way to measure success. Rather than competing in classrooms he knows he'll never dominate, Georgie begins finding confidence through practical work, business, and problem solving. One of the first people to recognize that ability is Herschel. When George Sr.'s truck develops mechanical problems, Georgie listens carefully before suggesting the thermostat may be the issue. While inspecting the vehicle, Herschel notices something even more impressive. Georgie can identify tire punctures without relying on the usual soap and water method many mechanics use. Herschel immediately recognizes genuine talent and offers him work at the garage. The moment is significant because, for the first time, an adult outside the Cooper family looks at Georgie and sees ability instead of poor grades. The family rarely believed Georgie paid attention in school, but he had been learning all along. He was simply paying attention to different subjects than everyone else valued. Around the same time, another small moment quietly hints at Georgie's future. George jokes that Georgie will probably be married before he turns 25.
Georgie, I'll bet you $1,000 you're married before you're 25.
You got a bet. Feel like I'm stealing your money.
At the time, it sounds like nothing more than playful teasing. Looking back after finishing the series, however, it feels like George understood his oldest son better than anyone else. Unlike Sheldon, whose future revolves around college and research, Georgie's life would begin much earlier. He was always eager to grow up, even if neither of them realized just how quickly that prediction would come true. Georgie's business instincts begin developing after Meemaw teaches him and Missy how to negotiate. While Missy treats it as a fun lesson, Georgie immediately sees practical value in it. Before long, he asks George for a small investment and visits a closing greeting card store, where he negotiates dozens of Texas snow globes down from more than $50 to just $35. Instead of stopping there, he goes door to door trying to sell them. When his first approach fails, he changes his clothes, adjusts his sales pitch, creates bundle offers, and eventually earns a profit. Without realizing it, Georgie completes an entire business cycle.
Dad, remember my silly idea?
Yeah.
Guess what? It's snowing.
He secures funding, negotiates inventory, adapts after rejection, improves his marketing, and successfully closes sales. Very few teenagers possess those skills naturally, yet almost nobody around him recognizes what he's accomplished. To most people, it simply looks like another temporary hobby. His success eventually earns him a job at Dale's sporting goods store, where he gradually gains enough trust to help run daily operations. When the store is robbed, Georgie makes mistakes while handling the situation, and even offers his own money to cover the loss because he feels personally responsible. His solution isn't perfect, but it reveals something important about his character. Instead of avoiding responsibility, he accepts it. After calming down, Dale realizes Georgie acted out of loyalty rather than selfishness. He apologizes, returns Georgie's money, and gives him another chance. The experience teaches Georgie something no classroom could ever provide. Success isn't about never making mistakes. It's about taking responsibility, learning from them, and continuing to move forward. By the beginning of season 5, however, Georgie's greatest strengths also become his greatest weakness. After years of learning how to read people, negotiate deals, and talk his way through difficult situations, he begins relying too heavily on those abilities. He becomes so confident in his own judgment that he starts believing he can solve almost any problem with charm alone. That confidence pushes him to make several of the biggest mistakes of his life. The first major decision comes when Georgie drops out of high school during his senior year. Convinced that he can earn more money through sales than by sitting in a classroom, he decides to leave school behind and focus entirely on work. Looking back through the lens of The Big Bang Theory, viewers know Georgie eventually builds a successful tire business, making the decision appear justified. But at the time, time, nobody, including Georgie, could know that future. He was simply a 17-year-old abandoning his education with no diploma and no guarantee that his business instincts would be enough. It wasn't proof that he was smarter than everyone else. It was a gamble. Soon afterward, Georgie begins working in Meemaw's illegal gambling room. Once again, the series highlights the difference between being talented and making good choices. Georgie quickly proves himself capable of handling customers, solving problems, and helping the business run smoothly. Meemaw gradually starts treating him as a genuine business partner instead of simply her grandson. His ability to organize operations and think on his feet is undeniable. At the same time, none of that changes the fact that the business itself is illegal. The show never suggests his talent excuses his decisions. Instead, it demonstrates that intelligence without good judgment can still lead someone into serious trouble. Nothing illustrates that lesson more clearly than his relationship with Mandy. When Georgie meets her, he immediately lies about his age, claiming to be 21 when he is actually only 17. Mandy also lies at first, saying she's 25 before later admitting she's really 29. The difference, however, is that Mandy quickly tells the truth, while Georgie continues maintaining his lie through multiple dates and conversations. He knows exactly what he's doing, hoping that if he keeps the deception alive long enough, it will somehow stop mattering. Eventually, Mandy becomes suspicious after questions about his high school yearbook, leaving Georgie with no choice but to admit the truth. The confession devastates her, and before either of them has time to process what happened, Mandy reveals that she is pregnant. The consequences spread far beyond Georgie himself. George Sr. and Mary are forced to confront the reality that their teenage son is about to become a father. Dale encourages Georgie to tell his father the truth rather than hiding behind excuses, while the scandal quickly reaches the rest of the family. Missy becomes a target at school and even at church, where another child mocks Georgie's situation. She responds by punching him, only for Georgie to stop her and admit that he isn't worth getting into trouble over. It's a small scene, but it shows something beginning to change inside him. For perhaps the first time, Georgie fully understands that his decisions don't only affect his own life, they affect everyone around him. As if the pregnancy wasn't enough, another disaster follows almost immediately. At the end of season 5, Georgie and Meemaw are arrested after transporting hundreds of cartons of undeclared cigarettes across the state line. When season 6 begins, they're still in custody, and Georgie's first instinct is to suggest escaping through a window instead of dealing with the consequences. It perfectly captures the teenager he still is: resourceful, optimistic, and completely unrealistic all at once. Eventually, George Sr. posts bail and takes his son home. Standing in front of his disappointed father, Georgie quietly tells him that he hopes to become the kind of father George has always been. That moment says more about Georgie's character than almost anything else in the series. He has lied, dropped out of school, become involved in illegal businesses, and now has a baby on the way. Yet despite all those mistakes, he still sees his own father as the example he wants to follow. Responsibility and immaturity exist side by side within him. He hasn't figured life out yet, but he genuinely wants to become someone better. That desire is exactly what prepares him for the greatest challenge of his life, because becoming a father doesn't instantly transform Georgie into a responsible adult. If anything, the arrival of CeeCee exposes just how much growing up he still has left to do. The biggest turning point in Georgie's life isn't dropping out of school, getting Mandy pregnant, or even being arrested. It's becoming a father. Television often likes to show young parents suddenly becoming responsible the moment they hold their baby for the first time. But Young Sheldon takes a much more realistic approach. Georgie doesn't instantly know what he's doing. Instead, the series allows him to struggle, fail, and slowly grow into the role through experience. Even before CeeCee is born, Georgie begins making sacrifices that the teenage version of himself never would have considered. When Mandy loses power because she can't keep up with her bills, Georgie immediately goes to help. In typical Georgie fashion, the situation quickly becomes chaotic after he accidentally walks into the wrong apartment and finds himself face to face with an armed neighbor. Although the mistake is entirely his own, he manages to calm the situation without anyone getting hurt. It shows that while Georgie often creates problems through impulsive decisions, he also has the ability to think under pressure when other people are depending on him. As Mandy's pregnancy progresses, Georgie starts realizing that becoming a father requires giving up parts of the life he once valued. One of the clearest examples comes when he trades his Mustang for a practical family vehicle. Earlier in the series, Georgie cared deeply about appearances. Nice clothes, confidence, and a flashy car helped him project the image of someone who had everything figured out. Trading the Mustang isn't simply exchanging one vehicle for another. It's the first major sign that someone else's needs are becoming more important than his own. Instead of choosing what makes him look successful, he chooses what will better support Mandy and their future daughter. The real challenge begins after CeeCee is born. Almost immediately, Georgie discovers that wanting to be a good father and actually knowing how to be one are two very different things. Determined to buy the safest equipment possible, he purchases one of the most expensive infant car seats available. The problem isn't buying it, it's installing it. No matter how hard he tries, he simply can't figure it out. Frustrated and overwhelmed, Georgie panics, gets into the truck, and actually begins driving away from the hospital before Sheldon convinces him to turn around. During the drive back, Sheldon calmly figures out how to install the seat, while Georgie focuses on getting them safely back. The moment is both funny and revealing. For years, Georgie had always been the practical brother, while Sheldon excelled academically. Yet here, the genius solves the practical problem, while the brother who normally prides himself on figuring things out is completely overwhelmed. Instead of pretending Georgie naturally knows how to be a father, the show allows him to look inexperienced, frightened, and completely out of his depth. That feeling continues after bringing CeeCee home. On the drive from the hospital, Georgie drives painfully slowly because he's terrified of putting his newborn daughter in danger. Later, both he and Mandy struggle to calm the crying baby, only for Sheldon to briefly quiet her by singing "Soft Kitty." Once again, Georgie finds himself realizing that love alone doesn't automatically make someone a capable parent. There are going to be countless moments where he has to learn through trial and error. His 18th birthday becomes another important milestone. Rather than spending the evening celebrating himself, Georgie leaves early because he wants to be with Mandy and CeeCee. On the very day he officially becomes an adult, he proposes to Mandy, deciding that the family they unexpectedly created is also the family he wants to commit himself to. The proposal doesn't magically solve their problems, but it proves that Georgie is no longer running away from responsibility. He's choosing it. That doesn't mean every decision he makes afterward is correct. Believing it's his job to provide for everyone, Georgie convinces himself that Mandy shouldn't return to work because he should be able to support the family alone. His intentions are genuine, but his thinking shows how inexperienced he still is. He wants to protect his family, yet he hasn't fully learned that building a family also means sharing responsibilities instead of carrying everything by himself. His judgment is questioned again when he brings baby CeeCee to Meemaw's illegal gambling room while he works. It's another reminder that growth doesn't happen overnight. Georgie is trying to become a responsible father while still relying on an illegal business to earn money. The series never hides those contradictions. Instead, it presents them as part of his gradual journey toward adulthood. Another meaningful lesson comes from an unexpected source. Audrey criticizes Georgie's grammar, pointing out that CeeCee will eventually learn to speak by copying her parents. At first, Georgie pushes back, unwilling to accept the criticism. After thinking about it, however, he quietly begins improving the way he speaks because he wants his daughter to have better opportunities than he did. It's a small change, but it reveals how different Georgie has become. Earlier in the series, criticism usually led to excuses. Now, it motivates him to improve himself. That persistence becomes the most important quality Georgie ever develops. It isn't his sales ability, his mechanical skills, or even his business instincts instincts that ultimately define him. It's his willingness to keep showing up, even after failing. And just as Georgie begins finding his place as a father and provider, life throws him a challenge far greater than anything he has faced before. Just as he begins settling into life as a husband, father, and provider, tragedy strikes the Cooper family. George Cooper Sr. suffers a sudden heart attack and dies, forcing Georgie to step into a role he never expected to fill. Overnight, he goes from learning how to care for his own young family to becoming one of the people responsible for holding the entire Cooper family together. George Sr.'s death sends every member of the Cooper family into grief, but each of them reacts differently. Mary becomes emotionally overwhelmed. Missy struggles to process losing the one parent who always seemed to understand her. Sheldon retreats into logic, desperately trying to make sense of something that cannot be explained. In the middle of all of it stands Georgie. Rather than falling apart himself, he immediately begins taking responsibility for everyone else. He retrieves his father's suit for the funeral, helps organize everything that needs to be done, and even attempts to calm the growing tension between Sheldon and Missy. While everyone else is consumed by grief, Georgie quietly starts doing the practical jobs that no one else has the emotional strength to handle. It's a role remarkably similar to the one George Sr. often filled throughout the series. One of the most emotional moments comes before the funeral service. Standing beside his father's casket, Georgie promises that he'll take care of the family and won't let him down. The scene carries enormous weight because viewers have spent 7 seasons watching George encourage, forgive, and support his oldest son, despite all of his mistakes. Now, for the first time, Georgie becomes the person carrying that responsibility forward. During the funeral itself, Georgie's eulogy reveals something the audience has gradually come to understand. He describes his father as someone who always believed in him. Earlier in the series, George and Georgie often struggled to communicate their feelings. Conversations between them frequently ended with jokes, misunderstandings, or awkward silence. Yet despite those communication problems, Georgie finally realizes how much support his father had quietly given him over the years. Looking back, he understands that George wasn't simply correcting his mistakes, he was preparing him for adulthood. Even during Meemaw's speech, Georgie continues looking after everyone else. When Missy becomes confused after hearing people laugh during stories about their father, Georgie gently explains that they're laughing because they loved him and are remembering the happy moments they shared. Even while grieving himself, he's still protecting his younger sister. His responsibilities only grow after the funeral. As Sheldon prepares to leave Texas for Caltech, Georgie notices something his younger brother doesn't. Mary isn't coping well. She's constantly crying, withdrawing into prayer, and slowly falling apart after losing her husband. Recognizing that she needs help, Georgie contacts Meemaw because he knows Mary shouldn't face her grief alone. Before Sheldon has even left for California, Georgie is already taking on the responsibility of caring for the family that remains behind. That sacrifice becomes even clearer years later in The Big Bang Theory. When adult Georgie reunites with Sheldon, he finally explains everything his younger brother never saw. After George Sr. died and Sheldon left for California, Mary was devastated. Missy was struggling through her teenage years, and someone had to keep the family together. That responsibility fell almost entirely on Georgie. While Sheldon focused on earning degrees and building his scientific career, Georgie stayed behind supporting his grieving mother, helping raise Missy, working to build his own future, and carrying responsibilities no teenager should have faced alone. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that Sheldon never fully realized what his older brother had sacrificed. Throughout much of The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon often dismissed Georgie as unintelligent or remembered him mainly as the brother who teased him growing up. Only after hearing Georgie's perspective does Sheldon finally understand the burden his brother carried. For one of the few times in the series, Sheldon sincerely apologizes, recognizing that while he was building his future, Georgie had quietly been protecting the family they both left behind. That conversation completely changes how viewers see Georgie Cooper. Throughout Young Sheldon, it's easy to focus on his poor grades, bad decisions, friends and constant mistakes. But by the end of his story, those failures become only part of a much larger picture. The teenager who cheated on exams becomes a successful businessman. The boy who lied about his age becomes a devoted father. The son who was constantly compared to his genius brother becomes the man holding his grieving family together when they need him most. Ultimately, Georgie's story isn't about proving that Sheldon was wrong for being called a genius. Sheldon remains one of the most brilliant scientific minds in television. Instead, Georgie's journey challenges the Cooper family's narrow definition of intelligence. Academic achievement wasn't the only kind of intelligence that mattered. The family also needed someone who could fix problems, build relationships, earn a living, raise a child, comfort a grieving mother, guide a younger sister, and carry responsibilities that nobody else could shoulder. When those qualities became most important, it wasn't the genius who stepped forward. It was the brother everyone had spent years underestimating. That is what makes Georgie Cooper's story one of the strongest character arcs in Young Sheldon. He doesn't become extraordinary because he suddenly turns into a genius. He becomes extraordinary because despite countless mistakes, he never stops growing. Every setback teaches him something new. Every responsibility makes him stronger. And when the Cooper family faces its darkest chapter, the boy everyone once dismissed as the dumb one becomes the person they simply couldn't survive without.